Hello, this is Brian Scuttle at Sonic Cinema. One of my very favorite movies, and probably the best movie I will see at Fantasia Fest, is Amelia Moses's horror thriller called Bleed With Me. It plays first on August 26th and then again on September 1st. I had a chance to talk to Amelia Moses as well as the lead actresses in the film, Lee Marshall and Lauren Beatty, about their work on the film, and I hope you enjoy those interviews. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
First of all, let me say I absolutely love this film.
Thank you.
I actually was rewatching it before getting on here because I wanted to refamiliarize myself with it before starting to talk to you about it. And what was the inspiration behind the movie?
Yeah, so it feels weird to say, but part of it with coming up with the idea was like a little bit financial because I really knew I wanted to make my first feature, but I had just finished film school and I knew I wasn't going to be given $1 million basically. So I was like, okay, what can I make that's very contained and, done on like a micro budget? And so it was like, okay, one location, 3 characters. And then I guess in the back of my mind, I had this idea of like the dynamic between a single person and a couple in this kind of remote location and what kind of dynamics would come out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the more like initial idea. And it's kind of like, does the couple then have an ulterior motive? And then it was kind of thinking about what that ulterior motive would be but I also knew I wanted to make something kind of psychological and from one person's perspective and the way we can kind of like distort that narrative a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I do really love about this film is the fact that the psychological elements of it are so important to the overall narrative and how well it works. I mean, you deal with post-traumatic stress, you deal with trauma. To a certain extent, there's a little bit of gaslighting as well, but also one of the things that was so striking to me is that there are also, as the story progresses and you start to sort of figure out more and more about Emily and Rowan, there's also an element of codependency between the two that comes into play as well. And I'm kind of wondering, sort of like, where did the idea for that dynamic in particular come from?
Yeah, I mean, there was actually a lot of variations within the script. I knew the kind of earlier versions were very much from like it is obviously from Rowan's perspective, the film still, but like looking at the relationship more one-sided. Mm-hmm. So I knew kind of Rowan very much idealized Emily, and the idea we kind of like put the people around us on a bit of a pedestal and kind of go, oh, well, they have everything that I don't have. Yeah. This kind of comparison that I think we can all do. And, oh, if I only had a good boyfriend and this and that, I would be happy, which is obviously, that's a complete fallacy. But those are the kind of ideas that were there. And then I guess like as the scripts went on, Emily's character became more and more developed, and then it very much became kind of like the two of them together. And it was really like the last few revisions of the script where the codependency stuff I think really came forward a lot more, because I worked with a script consultant who kind of wanted to bring that out more, and I think it was a really good idea about how they both kind of need each other, and like they kind of complement each other in a pretty fucked up way, but they kind of do, because Emily wants to be needed, and Rowan just really thinks Emily kind of like, maybe gets off on is the wrong word because I don't think it's sexual, but like she likes that Rowan admires her. Yeah. And she takes that in and it means something to her versus just like, who is this person, and so they are codependent, and I think that's kind of an interesting idea because I feel like I've seen that in a lot in female friendships, whether my own or other people, like it can be this really intense experience sometimes where you do kind of, it gets complicated and it's not romantic or sexual, but there's these really intimate things that are still present in that relationship.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons this movie works so well is because of the fact that even as we come to know more and more about Emily, and we still empathize with her for a great deal, not necessarily just because of what we learn about her past, but just because of the fact that she has these moments where it's like you see that there's a vulnerability to her character the same way there is with Ronan and or Rowan, sorry. And I think that's one of the reasons this movie is as effective as it is.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I remember writing an early director statement or something, the idea of like both women are kind of equally obsessed with each other, but for completely different reasons, too. And so I think, and Emily's vulnerability doesn't, obviously what she is doing or not doing, or however you want to interpret it, is still intensely fucked up, but she does have a vulnerability that is kind of equivalent to Rowan, and both women have kind of done bad things to each other, you know.
What was the how what was the process of working with your lead actresses through this, and what were there any particular challenges that they experienced in helping bring this dynamic to life?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was lucky because I'd worked with Lee Marshall before. She was in a short film I did a while ago, a couple years ago. And so her and I already kind of had a working relationship and a trust built there. And I got a sense of the way she worked and stuff. And then Lauren, she didn't audition either. I met her through a mutual friend, and she helped out on like a kind of little teaser we did for a grant application. And I was like, wow, this woman's really good and could really embody the character. And I guess the way I like to work with actors in those early stages is just to like talk as much as possible and just kind of like go through the script and talk with the characters and just kind of keep a conversation going to kind of create that foundation to then, go from there. Because on set, you want to have a bit of spontaneity, but you really want to have that base of like, establishing these things. And then I think like the film, it's hard for me to say because there's been so many variations, but definitely like the intention was to kind of keep it fairly ambiguous. I think in the film, it ends up feeling pretty certain that Emily is doing something, but maybe to what degree and all this kind of stuff. But my idea behind that for I think at one point Lauren was like, is she actually doing this? And I said, you decide and don't tell me, because like you can play it how you want to play it. But because the film's from Rowan's perspective, I needed to kind of stay in that perspective. Yeah. And stay more with Rowan. So I think like I worked a lot more with Lee and kind of let Lauren do her own thing, because I just felt she's a bit of an enigma and the film has to see her that way. So kind of I had to have that distance a little bit. So I also really like actors to kind of let them make their own decisions too about the characters, because I'm thinking about 20 different things. They're just thinking about the characters. So usually they're going to have a better intuition about those characters. And so I'd like to kind of leave things open for their own kind of additions, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges that you came across when it came to telling this story in sort of the way that you told this story?
I don't know. I mean, definitely, I don't know if this is kind of what you're touching on, but it was a very teeny budget, and that doesn't mean you can't make good art on a small budget, but even something like the amount of days you have to shoot is like a huge thing. So when you're really rushing through stuff, it can be difficult because you're like, are we getting it? But we have to move on because we just have so much stuff to shoot. And I had never done a feature before, obviously. And so my worry was really like everything tying together, because in a short, you can really visualize everything at once because you're like, okay, it's only like 10 minutes. I can kind of see the whole picture. But with a feature, you kind of get lost a little bit. So I was very worried about getting lost in the narrative. And most directors would want to shoot in order. It never fucking happens that way because you're just like scheduling and all these things. And the more the schedule went on, the more I was like, wow, this is completely out of order. Like nothing was in order. But luckily I had my editor on set. And so we were able to kind of have some conversations and look over some stuff together. And if there was something he felt like we were missing, overall, there wasn't any kind of huge issues with that. But I think I didn't want to get lost in it. And so the other thing too was like I kind of split up the script into like 5 sections with like a keyword for where Rowan was at. Because again, it's fully from her perspective. So whenever I was like, okay, where are we in the film? I'm like, okay, we're in the paranoia stage, or we're in this stage, to kind of anything to kind of simplify the process, because it's very overwhelming. Yeah. And you're just like, okay, there's so much shit going on. So I guess the challenge is like, how do you stay true to, the script and the story, and make sure you're getting those building blocks, and making sure you have the foundation of a good script. I think I really learned that whenever you're lost, the script is there to guide you. So if you've taken that time to do that good work in the first place and have the script at a good place, then you kind of are able to like lean back on that whenever you're a bit lost, knowing that then you'll be in the edit and you're like, oh, wait a second, we shot out of order, but there was an order that was intended, and here it's how it all plays out and stuff. So that was a long-winded answer.
That's all right. Were there any particular films that you were thinking about and sort of took into the making and developing of this one?
Yeah, so one of the really early inspirations, which is a very different film stylistically, but I had seen it around the time that I started writing, was Baghead by the Duplass brothers, which is much more like a mumblecore film. But there was something about just like spending time with these characters in a location where it just kind of took its time and stuff. And so I kind of like that aspect of it. And the handheld camera in my film is kind of a leftover from that early inspiration, even though stylistically it's like very, very different. And a film I'd seen at Fantasia actually in like 2016, I think, The Invitation, has always been like a huge inspiration for me since seeing that film. Cause like that has a similar pacing where it just like really takes its time, but you're very unsettled. And then it's really in like the last 20 minutes that things become much more chaotic. So I kind of liked that structure, and like some kind of visual similarities and stuff. And then the third film would probably be Antichrist by Lars von Trier, because of just like the way that cabin just feels like death sometimes, like the kind of location and like the feeling of that film. And it's funny because I feel like that's not really considered a horror film, but it totally is in the way that it's still like the kind of cabin in the woods thing, and like people losing their mind out in the woods, and like things turning up to 11. Like it has all those elements. So, and visually that was kind of a reference point too.
Who are some of your favorite filmmakers to watch?
Yeah. I feel like these are all really obvious answers, but I love David Cronenberg a lot, and Lynch a lot too, just because they do a lot of really good like world building. That's something, where it's not like world building as in like we're on an alien planet, but like the construction of it is like you're like, okay, someone is creating a space for this to exist in. I think they're both really good at that, and David Lynch is obviously incredible like atmosphere as well. And again, he's a director where he wouldn't really be considered a horror director, but to some extent some of his scenes have that feeling completely where you're like, this is a fucking horror movie. Like, like that scene in Mulholland Drive or whatever is like the most obvious one, but when they go behind the diner and the like creatures there, and you're like, that is so scary. It's this really terrifying scene, and his sense of dread where you're just like, something bad is going to happen, and you feel it really intensely. And I think that's a really cool aspect of horror, is like creating that tone where you're just like, I'm uncomfortable, but I don't know why. And I think that's an interesting thing to explore. So yeah, those are two ones. I do like Karin Kasuma as well, who did The Invitation and Jennifer's Body.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem.
And congratulations. It's really a terrific film.
Thank you.
I absolutely loved it. And I know I'm not the only person who's watched it who feels that way.
Thank you so much. No, that means a lot. Are you seeing a lot of films at Fantasia?
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to, I there are only so many hours in the day, but I mean, I've gotten to quite a few of them. So
fantastic
watching them. So thankfully we've had access to them for about since pretty much the beginning of the month. So
it's time to
a little bit of time to ramp up to it, and then so once it's going, it's not quite as overwhelming. So
yeah, totally.
But cool. Thank you very much for talking.
Enjoy. Thanks, talking. Okay, bye.
Good luck. Bye. Well, as I was saying, I really love the film. It's one of my favorite films that I have seen for the fest, and I know I'm not the only person who feels that way, and I'm kind of curious to go ahead and start off. What was it about this story that appealed to you, to both of you?
Wow, yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for those kind words. That's so wonderful to hear that you had such a great experience watching the film, because I think both of us had a great experience making the film. So it's good that translated. I was really attracted to the story, first and foremost, because of Amelia Moses, our director. I had worked with her on a short film called Undress Me that did really well on the festival circuit. And that was the first time I met her. I actually met her in the audition room when I auditioned for that part. Mm-hmm. And I just fell in love with her style of storytelling and creating. And when she told me about this feature, I just knew that I had to do it. Like, I mean, it was, if she was directing it, I would do it. And I honestly, I say to Amelia a lot that, like, she's the only director that could get me to walk barefoot in the snow, to cover myself in blood and gelatin. Like, she's a special person. And I think that's what brought me to the project.
Mm-hmm. Also, thank you for the kind words. That's amazing to hear. I think that, like, we think this movie is so special, and we had such an insane and incredible experience on it. So it's really amazing to see some of the reviews coming in and hearing people's thoughts and seeing that, like, what we kind of felt about it really translated. So that's really awesome. For me personally, sorry, someone is hammering next door. Really loud. Oops, I think they heard me. Okay. So for me personally, I actually met Amelia working on, we were both helping a friend of mine on a short film about 4 years ago, and we met on the set of that. And sorry, this is insane. And someone's literally, like, building a cabin beside me. She had asked me if I would help her with sort of like a teaser for a feature film concept that she had. And I was in Montreal at the time, and I helped her out with that. And I just had such a blast even helping her with this little kind of initial teaser of the concept that they were filming. Mm-hmm. So then when she came back to me years later and said, like, hey, remember that little teaser you helped me shoot in Montreal? Like, I wrote the whole feature, and guess what? We got funding and we're making the movie. Do you want to come on board and play the role that we, had you shoot the teaser as? And I was just 100% on board from the second she called me. Because again, like Lee said, she's such a special person, and she has such a clear vision and such a unique vision. And I think it's just, her voice is so needed in cinema, I believe, and just for women especially. So as soon as she was like, we're doing this, do you want to be a part of it? I was just like, no questions asked, 100%, I'm in.
Mm-hmm. I remember shooting that teaser, and it's actually, just for some background for Brian, the scene that we shot in the teaser, remember, it was like when we were getting drunk and playing cards, and we were doing like a bunch of sort of ad-libbing, and it's great because that energy from the teaser that we shot ended up really translating in that final scene in the film where we're at the table playing cards, getting drunk. Mm-hmm. So
It really did, yeah.
But we shot the teaser like 2 years before we shot the film, so that's really funny.
Yeah, and it was a different Brendan, and
yeah, same us though.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges that you two had in getting into the heads of these characters, because of the fact that this movie is so. One of the things that I love about this movie is that it leaves a lot of ambiguity for a good portion of it, and even at the end, we're not entirely sure how much we can believe what we're seeing and what the characters are experiencing as real or not. And what were some of the challenges when it came to getting into these characters?
I can take the lead on this one.
You take it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, Emily's character is pretty ambiguous. And I think, personally, I'd always wanted to sort of play a role that almost had a bit more of like a sinister feeling to it. Mm-hmm. I was being typecast, I think, a lot in sort of these like meek roles, like the girl next door, the friend, the lead, just nothing that kind of challenged me a bit more. And so I was very interested in that, and it definitely was a challenge because it was something different from what I'd been typecast in. But it was such a welcome challenge for me personally. I had such a great time sort of really like delving into my personal backstory that I created for this character. And I remember near the beginning, after I had read the full script, I was like immediately just like captivated by the story. But I asked Amelia, because I myself, as like an audience member at that time, I had so many questions, and I was like, is she actually doing this? Like, oh my God, like what's happening? Like, why would she do that to her friend? And like, is this actually happening? And Amelia had said to me, like, the way that they had crafted the story and the way that they were going to shoot the film was really from Rowan's perspective. Mm-hmm. So she had said to me, you decide. Like, it's really like, that's the kind of really cool thing about this film too, is because it's shot from Rowan's perspective, I could really have whatever backstory I wanted, and the film was still going to be the film. So she sort of let me make those choices, and we did have conversations about it, obviously. But for the most part, like, she really let me have the freedom to kind of decide really what her backstory was, and whether I wanted her to be the insane monster that Rowan kind of paints her to be, or whether I want her to be innocent, or whether I want it to be somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of what I personally went with, was something in between those two. So it was definitely a challenge. Also physically, I had a broken leg at the time.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So about 2 months before we started shooting, I was in a very terrible accident on vacation in Mexico. And I ended up having to stay there for almost a month. I basically tore up my leg pretty badly, broke it, and had an extensive surgery down there. And so when that happened, I remember calling Amelia and saying, look, the surgeon here told me it'll take 2 months for me to be able to walk normally with the cast. And it was exactly 2 months till we started shooting. And I was like, I was expecting her to fully just say to me, you know what, we're going to have to find someone else. It's going to be too hard. And luckily, and just another reason why Amelia is an amazing person and director, she said, how can we make this work? Mm-hmm. So, it was physically challenging for me, but we made it work, and we wrote some of it into the script, mm-hmm. and it was an amazing experience. Yeah.
Yeah, you and your broken foot, you were such a champion on set with all the snow and like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like you, Lauren, in the sense that I love a good backstory. I like to be a bit nerdy about it and like write out things and like plan the whole. Like, I don't make decisions about how I'm going to play the scene at all, but I do like to take a lot of time to think about where has this character been before they arrive on scene. Mm-hmm. So I did do a lot of thinking about that. What really attracted to me to Rowan was how she kind of is a victim, but she's also a villain at the same time. I like that kind of dichotomy in her. And I found that really interesting, especially because like Lauren, I often get typecast in sort of meeker, soft, unaggressive roles. So it was really exciting to have something different in Rowan to play. But yeah, I mean, I think so much of it just came from being together on set and playing off of each other. Lauren is very talented and very beautiful, so it's very easy to play a character who admires and respects her, because I do as a person. So yeah, I think so much of it was really just being able to be together in the moment and kind of play and see what came out on the day.
I think one of the things that really strikes me the hardest when it comes to this movie is there's not only a natural level of intimacy that you expect when characters are in a secluded environment like the three are in the movie, but when it comes to especially Rowan and Emily, there's almost on top of all of the other emotions that we see, there's also a codependency that both of them have towards one another, because I mean, Rowan obviously admires Emily, but at the same time, we come to find out that Emily needs Rowan not necessarily explicitly for the reasons that Rowan is becoming very uncomfortable when it comes to Emily. And I think that dynamic really plays extremely well in the movie in general.
Yeah, I think that where my codependency sort of the sense that you get from Emily that she also needs Rowan definitely came a lot from the backstory that I had created for her as well. Amelia and I had touched on that Emily has Munchausen by proxy disorder. And this sort of stems from her losing her younger sister at a young age. And the story I created around that was that she had really been acting as her younger sister's caretaker and had really taken on that role and felt, that was her purpose and she was really needed as this caretaker. So when she lost her sister, there was this void that was created, and she started to seek that out in her female friendships. So this is sort of like a pattern, is what I had, my story was for my character, is that, she has sort of manipulated female friends of hers in the past, not in a very sinister way, but enough to make them sort of manipulated them enough to make them dependent on her in a way. And she needs that from another person. So in turn, it's a codependency weirdly for her as well. So Rowan is like another example of that, and an example that, is a bit different from the ones in the past.
I feel like I should say something, but I can't remember the question.
No, that's fine. It was about the shared codependency that the characters feel for one another.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, Rowan, I am generally a pretty happy person and Rowan isn't. So that was a really difficult but challenging and exciting place to go as an actor. I think for Rowan, a lot of her unhappiness comes from a feeling that she has no control. That's part of the reason why she self-inflicts pain in the past, and it's part of the reason why she's so desperate for love from somebody else, because she doesn't feel it for herself. And so I think, for her, like, Emily is just this sun, and that light, like, shining on her, she can't turn away from it. So for sure, I mean, I think maybe more than was even obvious in the film, because the film really takes place in one location. Rowan kind of orbits around Emily's son. So for sure, there's like a major codependency there, just in different ways for both of the characters.
Yeah. Was there a feeling of claustrophobia? I would think that being stuck in that basic area for constant, you get a little claustrophobic, and I can imagine that would be a bit of a challenge when it comes to playing a movie like this, especially since so much of it is psychological.
It's so funny that you say that, because ever since the pandemic started and we've all been in lockdown, I was like, if this had happened before the film, we would have had such good training, because we all know what it's like to be stuck inside now. But yeah, I mean, actually, like, I was coming onto set with a lot of great friends in the crew, as well as like so much love for the cast, that, I mean, if I had to pick a bunch of people to be stuck in a cabin with, like, these were the people. But I think also for me as an actor, it was very helpful to really feel that claustrophobia, like it was real. Like, I didn't have to really think about how to add that to my acting, because it was just already part of what we were living. And it made the process of creating something so intense in like a really interesting way that I don't think you would experience on a larger set where you had multiple locations and like a much bigger crew. So there was an intimacy that came out of the experience. And I think that intimacy also comes across in the film itself, that this really, close relationship between the characters came through that condensed space of being together.
Yeah. It almost, like, speaking for myself at least, it felt like it really naturally sort of heightened the tension between all the characters, because we were really stuck together, like there was this like overarching sense of like captivity, like we were stuck there for even when we had days off where we weren't shooting, we were stuck there, because it was like, it was the butthole of winter when we were there. It was like nothing you've ever seen before. It was the most snow they'd had in, I think they said 20 years.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
We were there, and it was a very small town. There's like one guy that drives a like a plow around the streets, and like if he plowed the roads that day, then great, and if he didn't, then you just gotta figure it out. So there was this sense of this like urgency, but also this stillness and just like a tension that was just naturally there, which I think really like lended itself to the film. Yeah.
Had you done any previous work in horror where there's a noticeable difference in doing something more psychological versus something that is a bit more visceral, about a bit more physical?
So I had done actually a couple films that would be horror genre. So I had done a feature film, oh gosh, I can't remember how many years ago now, but it's called Pay the Ghost. And then I did actually the last installation of the Saw franchise. I had a small part on that. And those were both very much reliant on sort of the like physical horror. So in those cases, I guess, you really just trust the director to tell you like, oh, that looks great, you know, like we got what we needed, you know, your scream was loud enough, your terror was scary enough, and great, like let's move on. But I think with a film like this that's more of a psychological horror and a slow burn, you really have to trust the director and trust yourself that you know the backstory of your character enough, and you know the relationship and their motives well enough that it's just going to translate on screen. And it's kind of a scary thing because you're not relying constantly on blood and gore and stuff like that. You have to rely more on yourself and your you know, the work that you've done. But now, speaking from experience, I think it's so much more rewarding to be a part of a horror like this, where you see that gradual build of the horror, and see how that translates on film. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have as much experience working in horror as Lauren does. I did Amelia's body horror short, but it's interesting. Like, I think as an actor, it's such a fun challenge to play something like this. But in having seen the final product, I also think so much of why it's successful is all the other elements and other artists who've collaborated, whether it's, you know, Steph Bourbano and her amazing production design to create this atmosphere and this almost another character that is the cabin, right? Or, you know, amazing editing from Matthias Graham, all the cinematography by Renee Arsenault, and we have amazing practical effects from Kay Adelaide as well. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone there, but there was just such a stellar team. The music, how could I forget the music? Romita, Bob, and Dom, that they just did an incredible job. And I think with horror, maybe more so than some other kinds of films, it really is such a collaborative process, and especially for a slow burn, because, you know, we can act our hearts out, but if the music and the visuals and everything aren't there to support us, then people will not keep watching. And so, you know, we really have to take our hats off to the team for making us look so good.
Yeah, I second that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I'm glad we were able to set this up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking time.
And good luck with the. Are you guys doing the Q&A after the movie tomorrow night?
Yes, we are.
We are. Okay. 8:30, right?
Yes, I think yes. It is 8:30.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope it's well received. I'm fairly certain it's going to be well received. It's an extremely good movie. But yeah, thank you very much for your time.